YouTube management. This video is going to be flagged. Please watch it before pulling it. A lot of people aren't going to like it, but it's not hate speech. Mean and median IQ varies between self-identified race. Self-identified race was shown to corroborate well with genetic clusters in the 2004 Stanford study, Genetic Structure, Self-Identified Race, Ethnicity, and Confounding in Case Control Association Studies. I'm not a genes guy, so I can't really tell you the nuts and bolts or how genetic clusters even determined, but smarter people than me have figured this out, and I'm just sharing the results. In the study, they took 326 microsatellite markers from 2,478 self-identified Caucasians, Japanese, Chinese, blacks, Hispanics, and other. And they then told some smart guys to put these people in genetic clusters without telling them what the self-identified races were. And the geneticists came up with 4 clusters, A, B, C, and D. And wouldn't you know it, the clusters each contained almost exclusively members of one self-identified race. Here's that data on a graph. In fact, only 0.2% identified in the wrong cluster, 5 out of 2,478, or 1 in 500, or about 1 in 500. Now, what's very interesting about this is that Hispanics function as a genetic cluster in the same way that blacks and Mongoloids did, something I found interesting, but that's immaterial. So if you want to come in here and say that there's no such thing as race and that black people are a social construct, you need to present some evidence. You will need to give an argument that has bones. No more appeals to authority, because there are guys with PhDs who believe in things like intelligent design and the Communist Manifesto. So just because a university says it doesn't mean it's true. Now, my main focus is going to be on 3 races: whites, blacks, and Mongoloids, because that is what I could find the best data on. Here's some data on Mongoloids. You can see the number of studies, the number of people within these studies, and the age group tested. The best data is on the US and Japan because they have the most studies and are appropriate samples. Mongoloids in China and Brazil are depressed, and Mongoloids in Hong Kong are elite. The numbers from Canada and Taiwan aren't too far off from the US and Japan, so for a representative population, one can put Mongoloids between 103 and 105, and so I subscribe to a Mongoloid median IQ of 104. Here are some African nations. Now, I did cherry pick these samples, but they are some of the better results I could find. These are the results from Africans in schools or in universities. If you see scores like 60, that usually means some guys went out into the villages, and that's inappropriate. Lynn and Rushton say that Africa's IQ is 70, and that's probably true, but it's not the whole picture. The data here seems to indicate that given a reasonable shot, the number is more like 80. And when we compare that to blacks in the USA at a predicted median at 85, blacks in the UK at 89, and in the Barbados at 82, it doesn't seem too far off. I really don't know what to make of Jamaica. That number comes from 3 studies. One showed 72, one showed 75, and one showed 66, and N is big, so while that Jamaican number is extraordinary, I think it's about right. Here are some white populations around the world. I'm not going to read these off. It sometimes dips below or above, but it's really worldwide whites score at about 100, which is the result IQ tests are designed to create. Some numbers that pop out are from West Germany. Both studies were done prior to unification. Sweden's also interesting, as N is large. So is Spain. That N is very, very high, but I'm a bit skeptical. It mostly comes from one nationwide standardized test, which was translated into an IQ score. I put that in, but I'm just treating it as one study. Poland's number is very interesting because N is large, and both studies were similar. So is Yugoslavia, 104. Romania is only 1 point above Bulgaria, and Holland is the highest in Europe, and I can believe that. Here's some more scores. It's not very interesting. Worldwide, whites look at about 100. I average these together. It's about 100, and in the United States, it's 100 by design, so it's 100. Now, this slide is ancillary, but people are interested in it. Now, I'm filled with a touch of glee because I predicted Indians in Britain to have an IQ of 96, and I found a study which confirmed this. The number is only 170, though. South African Indians at 85, and that's 7 points higher than South African blacks. And interestingly enough, 96, which is Indians in Britain, is 7 points higher than 89, which is blacks in Britain. Don't know if that means anything, but I thought that was interesting. There are the Native American tribes, Ojibwa. The Ojibwa are the highest, and I have a link in the description to another video that may give a hint as to why this is. Here's also a little visualization of the data. The x-axis doesn't mean anything. The bubbles represent countries, and the size is the number of studies done. Now, the reason I chose number of studies instead of number of testees is because each study makes an attempt at a representative sample. As seen in Spain, a large number doesn't always mean a representative one. For whites, there are so many 100s and 101s that I had to put them all into single giant bubbles. And you can see that there is some overlap between whites and Mongoloids, but if you drew a net around each group, you would see that Mongoloids tend to be a bit higher. Here's another representation with just the big 3. It's an area graph with IQ on the x-axis and the number of studies on the y-axis, and you can see a great deal of overlap between whites and Mongoloids. You can see the scores within the 3 countries within 3 countries that I found. Apparently you guys didn't like South Africa that much, but it really doesn't show much difference than these 3. British whites at 101, British Indians at 96, British blacks at 89. Okay, here we have American whites at 100, American Mongoloids at 104, American Native Americans at 94, and American blacks at 85. Brazilian Mongoloids at 99, Brazilian whites at 95, Brazilian browns, they call themselves browns, at 81, and Brazilian blacks at 71, which is the same as Jamaica. I don't know if that means anything, but that's interesting. Now, the consistency of these results between and within countries seems to show that there is indeed a worldwide IQ hierarchy, and because it is worldwide, it suggests that perhaps something innate is involved, maybe genes, and the only other explanation being that racism affects everyone in precisely the same order in every country on the planet. That would be quite a coincidence. We can also see that these hierarchies play out in an adoption study. Here's the old workhorse, Minnesota transracial. At age 7, adopted whites had an IQ of 112, and adopted blacks at 97, which is a 15-point gap. At age 17, the adopted whites fell to 106, the adopted blacks fell to 89, which is another 15-point gap. This mirrors the national gap, which is 15. And the mulatto IQ at age 17 was 99, which is a 7-point gap, about halfway between whites and blacks. So there's your hybrid vigor. And also, Sandra Scar made a note. She didn't put any numbers on this. I wish she had, but simply noted that no mulattoes were ever told they were mulattoes. They were told they were either white or black, depending on how they looked. And she said that there was no difference in scores between the white and black mulattoes. The total drop-off from age is not unusual, sadly enough. There are 2 adoptions done with Koreans in Belgium and Koreans in the USA. There's some interesting commentary on this, that the malnourished ended up not having much different higher IQ or lower IQ. But here's just the main results. The USA results are not much higher than the Mongoloid adult at 104. So here's them, Belgium at 110. So the environmental controls were imposed. These racial IQ gaps, these hierarchies don't go away at either end. Here are the brain and head size samples from different races. As seen before, brain size and IQ correlated about 0.4 according to MRI scans, but unfortunately there isn't any data on race and brain size with the MRIs, as it seems not many organizations want to perform such research. So we're stuck with old head sizes and autopsies. Now, brain size in an autopsy is always a bit hairy because apparently the brain can shrink pretty rapidly after death, but that's why I use lots of samples so these things wash out. And this data I have here is compiled by Rushton. Now, Rushton uses this data to advance his RK theory, which is a bit of a stretch for me, but this data right here is just data. It comes from 5 different studies in the description, and all 5 of these show some variations of the 3-way hierarchy, with Mongoloids at 1364 centimeters cubed, whites at 1347 centimeters cubed, and blacks at 1267 centimeters cubed. And if you plot all these measurements, you get a squared correlation of 0.785, which is what I did. Now, when you plot just the averages, which of course is what Rushton did, you get a squared correlation of 0.998, which, almost total determination for the populations. And we can see difference between individuals and populations in the previous video. Now, the problem with doing it the way Rushton did is that it assumes a great deal of linearity, that the 4-point white Mongoloid IQ gap means 4/15ths of the 15-point black-white IQ gap. See, this is because IQ is not a ratio, it's an interval. Going from 95 to 100 isn't necessarily as significant as going from 100 to 105. Rushton is assuming linearity, so I can't trust this correlation. But I can more generally say that bigger brains result in higher IQs, generally. And the different races have different sized brains, generally. Okay. Last is that according to James Flynn, the black-white IQ gap widens with age. I'm just using Flynn's numbers because I'm too lazy to look anywhere else, and this is pretty widely accepted. Flynn claims that because the IQ gap widens with age, that's a sign that environment is taking its toll. That is baloney. As we can see in the Colorado Adoption Project, the Dutch twin study, and the twins' early development study, genes, and it can only be genes because they are reared apart, play a bigger and bigger role as years go on. It's called gene amplification. So as genes become more important, the black-white IQ gap widens. The totality of evidence shows that IQ gaps differ between self-identified races, and almost all systematic analyses designed to tease out causation show these gaps are mostly genetic in origin, especially the population gaps. Hold your horses, I'm not done. I'm going to make one more video to wrap up some loose ends.